Hello and welcome to a Community Futures Entre-Corp HR workshop put on in collaboration with our friends over at Alberta Labour and Immigration and our Workforce Development Officer. Community Futures also receives funding from the Government of Canada, and we would like to acknowledge those two funders in helping us bring this important skill set to you. So a couple years ago, the Brute Survey identified in our region that we needed to help our businesses build HR capacity. As many of us, I know I owned a small business and it wasn't in the budget to have an HR person on staff or to bring in a consultant CPHR. So we're really happy to bring you these facilitators from across the province and locally and help you build up your HR capacity and skills within your business. We hope that this makes your workplace safer, healthier, happier, and more productive. We're going through extraordinary change right now, and you're going to enjoy hearing from facilitators to help you understand and work with everything from gig workers to mental health, resiliency, finding purpose, hazard assessments, and a number of other things. So thank you so much for joining us. It's our pleasure to have you on board. Please share them with your friends, watch them at any time you need. And thank you again to our funding partners and the facilitators who have done such a great job on these. Take care. There we go. We're going to record these and we are going to have them available for you to watch asynchronously, which is the new fancy way of saying when it's convenient for you. We won't be able to record the breakout rooms, and that's okay because we really want you guys to share and gals to share information and not be worried about the fact that you're going to be, on the internet forever like I am right now. So the breakout rooms won't be recorded, but the delivery of the information by Ada will be. So, and we hope to build an audience as we go through these 8 months. So encourage your friends to watch the previous one. And then I'm going to give you a teaser on the next one, which is going to be on October 22nd on managing a remote workforce, which is another new thing that we're dealing with that seems to be sticky and not going away. So I'm going to quickly introduce Ada and then turn the floor over to her. I should mention though, what am I forgetting? Chat. If you have questions, do me a favor and put them into the chat. So if you click on participants, you will see the chat bar open, and make sure that the to drop-down box says everyone, or actually if you just want to, am I in here? You probably can just send your comment to me if you don't want others to read it. By the way, on that note, the polls are anonymous as well. So you can send it to me or to everyone, it's fine. I will bring these questions to Ada at the end and have her address them so we don't interrupt her through the workshop. So Ada is a, you get a lot of initials here. The important one for us today is a CPHR. So she's an HR professional, and as are some of our advisory committee. So Ada's got an MBA. She's a chartered professional in HR, and she has the designation of Society for Human Resources Management Senior Certified Professional designation. That's a mouthful. She's a dedicated and innovative HR professional. Her consulting firm, Bada B, provides effective and pragmatic HR services and corporate training. Ada strategically integrates effective HR processes, programs, and practices into your daily operations and provides customized training sessions that align with the client's business objectives. She also provides personal job search and career coaching. I didn't realize that. I skipped over that, Ada. And she's regularly invited to speak on human resources, people management, career search, networking topics throughout the province. Additionally, she's a well-respected instructor at the University of Alberta and MacEwan University for both virtual and in-person classes. So we're excited to have Ada here today with us. There's a broad range of topics there. We've spoken about a number of them as well. But for the purposes of this series, they're going to be HR related. So having said all of that, I'm going to turn it over to Ada. Ada, feel free to remind me if I've missed anything to circle back and address them. And over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Mike. And good afternoon, everyone. Nice to meet you virtually. I do hope that one day we're going to meet each other in person so we can make the 90 minutes a lot more interactive. But today I'm going to try to make it as fun, practical, and interactive as I possibly can. And to be honest with you, I have delivered quite a few webinars during the summer month and attended many as well. So myself, I have been having the Zoom fatigue. So I'll try not to impose that on you on top of everything that you have gone through in your business due to COVID. I am going to share my screen so you can see the PowerPoint slides, but I had also put in the chat box a link to Google Drive that contains today's PowerPoint slides, as well as the case study that we're going to use towards the end of today's session. So you're welcome to click into the link and check the materials there. So I had already put it into the chat box. As Mike had mentioned, my name is Ada. I'm going to walk you through today's 90 minutes topic or presentation. And so as we all know that since our province declared COVID-19 as a public health pandemic, our lives have been impacted, haven't they? Kids are rearranged from studying at home or going back to school. And also our business life has been impacted much as well. But you're definitely not in this alone. According to a recent Deloitte article, it shows that about 2.7 billion people globally have been impacted by the pandemic, which means just over 4 out of 5 professionals have been impacted by the lockdowns or stay-at-home measures. And businesses and owners and managers and leaders are asked to think about how to deal with all the crises at last minute very quickly and rethink about the workforce strategies. So when September kicks and the kids are going back to school and the businesses are inviting people more coming back to the office more than before, I even see the traffic on the roads are quite busy these days. And I see people driving faster than in the summer month. Just as I felt that I had been adapted to the COVID routine, things have been changed again in September. So in today's webinar, we're going to talk about, first of all, dealing with the changes. How can we develop some strategies to cope with the different challenges and situations? To start off with, we're going to take a short moment to reflect on our learnings during the pandemic. What did we learn? What can we take forward in order to sustain our operations? And then we're going to talk about the must-have policies and procedures to be equipped with for your workforce. And also, if you had laid off workers during the summer month, how do we properly recall them back and reintegrate them back into the workforce? And we're going to spend just a few minutes on a quick refresher on employment standards around layoff and recalling workers. And then we're going to answer 2 essential questions which are top of mind these days for employers. One is, what if my workers come to me with an accommodation request? The other one is, I need to rely on my workforce, but some of my workers are refusing to come back to work. What do we do in those situations? And then we're going to break you into a breakout room to do a short case study and finish off with Q&A. Sounds good. So first of all, I would like to invite you to introduce yourself a little bit. We have quite a few people on the line, so we don't need to hear the voice from everybody at this moment. I would rather have you put in your organization, the type of organization, the type of role that you play in your organization into the chat box, and why are you here today? So we'll take about half a minute for you to do that. Thank you. Thank you. I see people started putting in their comments into the chat box. Some of you come from HR backgrounds, and some of you work in the government organization, library system, not-for-profits. Interest in today's topic because it's timely. Some people are interested in learning how to properly manage a high-performance team, recalling temporary laid-off workers due to slowdown in operations. Excellent, thank you. Great, and some of you come from a municipality or provincial government backgrounds, not-for-profits. wanting to learn more, just anything related to HR or people management, well, thank you very much. And take your time to put in your answers in, or some of you are small business owners like yoga studio and retails. So take your time and to put in your answers into the chat box. I'm excited to be here today as well. So first of all, as for some business owners and managers, COVID imposed a lot of challenges, but to some people, challenges bring opportunities, don't they? For some businesses, they're thriving during the COVID period. So for example, IT industry or organizations, healthcare, food delivery or Amazon delivery or delivery in general, and research and development around biotechnology. Those industries have been doing really well during COVID. And there are some industries who are working hard to maintain the status quo, such as education. So I teach at universities. I've learned a few things about their practices during COVID. All our classes now in the fall and winter terms are going online. And also utilities is essential service. We cannot live without water and power and sewage. Professional services are also trying to maintain their status quo. Some industries are heavily impacted by the COVID, and especially small business owners and small businesses. Industries such as retail, hospitality, entertainment, tourism, oil and gas. I was saying to my family that I really wish that we could travel in the summer, just like every other summer, but unfortunately we couldn't this year. So businesses have been impacted by COVID, and this is a time for us to really think about realigning what we do with our vision, mission, and strategies. Who are we as an organization, and what do we do really well? Can we still focus on these things going forward? I would suggest for business owners and managers to do a scenario planning. By that, I mean plan your best case scenario, worst case scenario, and anything in between. So, but by that, for example, I mean plan a scenario, for example, if your revenue or if your service demand is up by 80% for half a year. What do I need to do as a manager, as an owner? Do I need to hire more people? Do I need to perhaps expand my office locations? Do I need to purchase more equipment or have more partners in as vendors and suppliers? So that's the best case scenario, for example. The worst case scenario would be if my revenue is down by 80% for 8 months, what do I need to do? And at what stage do I need to lay off workers, reshuffling my resources, and et cetera, et cetera. And then anything in between. By thinking through different scenarios, really help business owners and managers to plan for the unforeseeable and uncertain futures. The other questions that I would invite you to think about is what has permanently changed in your organization, in your way of doing business? What are some of these changes are temporarily in place because of COVID? So because of that, what did we learn in terms of operational efficiency? What can we do better going forward? What builds us as a resilient business? Maybe this is also a good time for us to think about investing into technology so we can speed up our operations, so we can speed up our efficiency and reduce waste. This is also a good time for us to evaluate our business model. Do we do our business the same way as in the past, or do we need to make slight changes or major changes? As managers and business owners, we understand the changes imposed on the business, and now we have think through a little bit about different scenarios. One thing I forgot to mention is cash flow. For any businesses to survive a pandemic like this, maintaining and managing your cash flow is key, and that should also be part of your scenario planning. By that, I mean watch your accounts receivable, accounts payable, and your inventory levels. Do not scale up your workforce too fast or spending on overhead too much too quickly before you have a steady source of continuously increased income or revenue. Now we have thought through different scenarios and planned about, okay, what do we need to do in different situations? Let's talk about the right sizing to right size your workforce. So by that, there are two different scenarios. Maintain status quo is always easy, but in most of the cases, it's not that, right? So we either have to scale up the workforce or scale down the workforce. And unfortunately, a lot of times we are required to do that really, really fast at last minute. So in order to forecast your staffing needs and levels, the questions we need to ask ourselves are, what kind of work needs to be done at each of my work sites? What kind of talent, which means skills, qualification, experiences we need at those sites? Will the service or product demand at these sites increase, status quo, or decrease, and to what extent? There is a little bit of assumptions to make, but always allow some flexibility in your calculations. And what kind of support, if we, let's say, hire more people or reduce the workforce, what do our existing employees need support from us as managers? In order to scale up your workforce, who are your core staff that you can constantly rely on to do the additional work? But in addition to that, how can we scale up the workforce with some contingent workers? Which means that we may now know that the scaling up of the needs in our business, the demands in our business is permanent. What if the demands is temporary? So who can we call upon to come into our workforce to help us with the work that needs to be delivered? So for example, it could be students that we hire. In that situation, also make sure you check the government resources when it comes to subsidies or fundings for students. You can also check on the retired communities. Volunteer group that you rely on in the past for nonprofit organizations, for instance. If you run a small business owner, or if you're a small business owner, or if you're mom and pop shop, perhaps families and friends can also help, neighbors. Other would be part-time workers, remote workers. You can also call upon staffing agencies. These agencies typically have a handful of workers readily available to work under short notice and to help you with something that's a high volume and fast paced. I once worked in an organization and we had to hire additional 150 bodies for a 3-day event. So that was very challenging, that we need to scale up the workforce very quickly, but for a very short period of time. The one lesson I took away from that experience was it wasn't too bad to get these 150 bodies into the workforce. What was difficult was managing the training and onboarding process for that short period of time. So as an owner, as a manager, think through the steps that you need to hire these people for a temporary basis for quickly to get them into your workforce, what tools they're going to use, what processes they need to be aware of, and policies and safety protocols so they can get the work done and do it effectively and efficiently. On the contrary, if you run a restaurant, for example, the summer month unfortunately has come to an end and the peak season may be already finished. So in those situations, you may need to wind down your workforce a little bit. Who do you lay off? In my opinion, even though I work in HR, I do a lot of layoffs and terminations. It's always the last resort for a business. So if you do have to lay off people, ask yourself, how do I do it? And who do I lay off first and last? Is it based on seniority? Is it based on availability? Is it based on your workers' performance? Or perhaps a combination of everything? And also perhaps skill sets. Maybe your workforce, your business models have changed. Now you need a slightly different talents with different skill sets to help your business going forward. And also make sure that if you lay off workers, maintain a transparent and caring communication with your workers. So in that situation, we're all human beings. We want to be respected, how we want to respect others, how we want to be respected, right? So when we have to lay off workers, give them as much notice as possible and be transparent about it. So people would understand every business is in a tough situation. But if you maintain that contact and if you show a caring attitude, do as much as you can as a business owner, the workers would appreciate that. Which means when your business ramp up down the road, it'll be a lot easier to call these people back into your workforce. And it's also really hard to build a solid employer reputation, but it's very easy to destroy that reputation. So take the scaling up or scaling down of your workforce as an opportunity to reinforce your good culture and reputation. At the same time, let's not forget about our customers and vendors and suppliers. I cannot imagine if your vendors, top vendors and suppliers go out of business because of COVID, what are you going to do? Is there a scenario planning of that? Is there a contingency plan for that? always keep the customers informed too. There are certain restaurants that my family like to go here in Edmonton, and when COVID first hits, I check on the website, I call them, nobody answers their phone. There is no greeting message saying we're open, we're closed, or we only do delivery. And the website is not up to date. Social media accounts are not up to date. That's not a very good business practice. Even though your business has been impacted and you want to maintain that communication with the customers. A lot of the smaller businesses draw the audience from the local communities. So maintaining that partnership, maintaining that dialogue with the communities are really critical to maintain a good business reputation going forward. I also often see that business leaders and managers busy with firefighting, which means there are business operational needs they need to take care of at last minute. Sometimes it's enforced upon them. Sometimes it's just without proper planning. Also situations I see managers, instead of prioritizing their work on a daily or weekly basis, the first thing they do, check emails, going through the laundry list of things, check things off the list is important to them, than making sure they're doing the right things. This is a great moment for us to rethink and embrace the change about COVID. What do we need to do to align ourselves with our strategic plan, with our vision and mission as an organization, so we can sustain our operation, continue to develop and revamp in the future? Focus on the priorities. Ask ourselves, what do we do best? What products or services bring us the most profitability, or helps us serve the best of our communities, of our clients? And once we have answered those questions, and this is where we should spend the time, energy, the talents, and the resources on. So that's what I meant by focus on your priorities. All right. It's a good time for me to have a sip of water, but before I do that, I would invite you to put an answer into the chat box again. What's the biggest challenge that your organization is currently facing in the reopening? So I'll give you a half a minute to do that in the chat box. Thank you. Some of you have been participating into the chat box. Some of you said that the government is in a tough financial position. I've been following the news as much as it's healthy for me. So I certainly can understand the situation. Another person said having staff that have been working remotely reintegrate into the workplace. That's concerning, that's challenging, which is something we're going to address in just a moment, especially when it comes to childcare and worker safety. Restaurants who are uncertain about how many staff to recall, absenteeism in the workplace, nonprofit organization, grants, sponsorships, donations are done. Totally understood. And you're definitely not in this alone. Thank you. I appreciate those of you who put in your comments into the chat box. Please take a moment, if you haven't, put in more comments into the chat box. So the second part of today's webinar or presentation, if you will, we're going to cover some of the things you have put into the chat box. First of all, I'm going to, with my HR experience and backgrounds, I'm going to re-emphasize on the important policies and procedures that many employers have not thought about to put in place, but are critical to have to protect yourself and your workers. And then we're going to talk about, just like one of you put in the chat box, how do we reintegrate workers back into the workplace? And then during that conversation, we're going to just do a quick recap, refresher on employment standards change, and then identify some strategies or some tips about accommodation of different requests and dealing with refusal to come back to work. So some of the must-have policies and procedures. I don't mean this to be an HR 101 or Policy 101 class. So I'm just going to go quickly highlight a few of the policies and procedures that I have seen in my humble experience that businesses usually forget about, but essential to have during, especially during a pandemic like what we're experiencing right now. Pandemic plan. This is a plan that's often missed in business. When I say the word pandemic plan, it does not need to be a 50-page fancy document. It can be a very simple document. So especially for smaller organizations or mom and pop shop. A pandemic plan is to address the essential elements so you can maintain open, so you can maintain your operations. Who is responsible for what should there be disaster happening? What are the steps? At what stage do we need to give workers PPE, personal protective equipment, rearrange our office infrastructures and procedures? At what stage we have to close down our office and send our workers home and inform our customers of closure? Who is dealing with the external stakeholders, the media, the customers, the social media accounts, and et cetera, and et cetera. And then remote work policy is also essential. So Mike had mentioned at the beginning of today's webinar that the next session in later October, you're going to hear more about managing a remote workforce. Excuse me. But I'm just going to quickly allude to a few key essential points to have in this policy. Just because your workers were sent to work from home, work still needs to be done. Working from home or attending a meeting or a conference behind a screen is only a change in the work approach and method. They're using a different tool to get the work done. Work still needs to be done. So in your remote working policy, very much make sure that you address the performance expectations. What needs to be done? What's the attendance requirements? Attendance in terms of the daily hours, perhaps. It could also mean attending of different meetings, in what formats, what's the dress code requirements, and also what's the communication, proper communication. If we have a small team, perhaps social media or text messages suffice, but if we need to send out formal announcements, what kind of communication should we have in place for remote workers? Meetings, workstations when it comes to health and safety. The OHS, Occupational Health and Safety rules around working from home is different than if the workers are in the office or on the work site. At home, you want to remind of your workers about tripping hazards. Do they have computer wires or power cables on the floor? I mean, you cannot really go into the workers' home to inspect how they do their work, but you can remind them and make sure you document those conversations. That's to show that you have been doing a diligent job as an employer, as a caring manager. Also remind them of fire hazards, and also remind them of fatigue when it comes to working from the computer. My eyes get really dry after I watch a webinar or I stare on the computer, join a team meeting, etc. So sometimes I would suggest for my teams, because I run my own consulting business, I also have a small team that I meet on a regular basis. So we would change up our methods of meeting. If we do a webinar or a web conference, then the next time we're going to meet by the phone or social media. So we change it up and it's a little bit more dynamic. It's fun. We have lots of young people in the organization. And also if we're now meeting face-to-face via a screen, I can be in my pajama. I feel really comfortable. I walk up and down my stairs. So in half an hour meeting calls, I finish my daily steps target for myself. So you can do different things to make it fun for your team. And also make sure your workers are aware of confidentiality when it comes to customers. So for example, my neighbor works in an insurance company, and her company does not allow their workers to work from home at all, despite during COVID, and all the work they do can be arranged to work from home. But the owner is very scared of workers' performance not to par. He's afraid that if he's not there to micromanage his employees, then nobody's going to perform hard. When you don't trust workers, the workers are going to react the same way. And in her company, so the owner has put in a lot of restrictions around confidentiality for customers. Especially if you have workers working from home, that's essential, that's critical to make sure that you're protecting the cybersecurity and also customers' information. If they're going to store anything, store it on the company's drive. Acceptable use policy is regarding what's acceptable to use of company resources when it comes to workplace, phone, equipment, credit card, company vehicle, printer, all those kind of things. Company resources or equipment. What's acceptable? What's not acceptable when it comes to using a company resources for personal purposes. Social media policy. Nowadays, I see social media posts on LinkedIn so often because everybody's online almost all the time during their waking up hours. So you want to make sure your business is protected. Who is in charge of managing your social media accounts? what they can post, who is going to do that final proofreading to make sure what they post is appropriate. And the workers who are not in charge of your public social media accounts, they also have their own social media accounts. What's appropriate for them to post on their personal account when it comes to related to business information. You also want to make sure there is a respectful workplace policy. This has been around for a couple of years, for some years, and especially during COVID, a lot of employers will forget about, okay, so workers work from home or they're laid off. Why should I care? To be respectful towards each other. This is a good time to maintain your workplace culture and your reputation by reminding people what's acceptable behavior and what's not acceptable when it comes to respectful communications. Typically, in a respectful workplace policy, you want to address what's considered discrimination, harassment, bullying, physical or sexual, verbal, and also what's considered not appropriate behavior to impose on each other. And you also want to lay out what are procedures should employees experience any of these to report to the HR, to the manager, and to make documentations. What the managers and employers need to do in order to investigate, make decisions, and make repairs. You also want to make sure that your business is dedicated to protect the well-being of the workers. Performance expectations, we talked about it. Just because workers have different ways of doing work still needs to get done. Confidentiality. On the right-hand side of my screen, you also see there are a few reminders. Health and safety. If you're gradually bringing your workers back to the work site or offices, make sure that you have health and safety protocols in place, which I'm going to touch on in the next few slides. Benefits offering. In July, I did a free webinar along with a benefits broker. You are welcome to check out my company's YouTube channel. There is the recording of the webinar about that we're expecting as HR, as benefits brokers, that in 2021 to 2022, we're expecting about up to 20% premium increase for workplace benefits. And that's attributed to many reasons. A lot of it is the increased drug usage and increased mental health claims during COVID period. And we also see an increase in the short-term disability claims during this time. So as an owner, as a manager, if I know that my workplace benefits premium is going to be increased, this is a good time for us to reassess what's included in your benefits package. What's important to note is that, do you have sick days offering to your workers? Do you have a short-term and long-term disability program offered to your workers? Do you have dental, health, vision coverage? Those are typical things. I also talked to a few professional services organizations. During COVID, they also offered additional supports in terms of dollar values to their workers to purchase ergonomical desk, computer, or chairs when they work from home. Also, they upped their game in terms of mental health. So for example, some of these organizations will offer additional counseling dollars. But also, if your workplace has an EFAC program, which means Employee Family Assistance Program, that's a short-term solution-focused counseling services offered to employees to deal with personal issues so they can be fully productive at a workplace. Those are very inexpensive to set up as an employer, but it's a very good resource to refer your workers towards. And then, of course, they can always go to their counselors or psychologists to seek further help. According to, according to a recent article published by Canadian Mental Health Association in Ontario, the survey says that 70% of Ontarians believe that the province is headed towards a serious mental health crisis as it emerges from pandemic. And during this time, a quarter of the respondents reported consuming more substances, such as alcohol, tobacco, and cannabis during this time. This research also shows that about 80% of people in the province worry about their future, both for their families and their career life. So as an employer, as you're gradually recalling workers back to the workforce, this is a good time to think about what can we do as an organization to promote a healthy mental workplace culture. And cybersecurity that we had talked about. One of you have put in the chat box, how do we properly or better reintegrate our workers to the workforce? I don't know about you, but for myself, if I had gone on vacation for a week or two, when I come back to the workplace, it will take me a couple of days just to get back to my routine and refresh myself with all my contacts, all my tasks and duties. So allow some time and patience and space for your workers to be reintegrated. First of all, let's make sure when you recall your workers back to the workplace, follow the employment standards. And allow me to do a quick refresher of the employment standards here. When you're laying off or recalling your workforce, make sure those notices are given in writing. If it's a layoff notice, follow the Alberta Employment Standards Codes. It says very clearly what sections you need to include in the layoff notice, and also how many weeks of notice you need to provide to the workers. So if the workers have been with your organization for less than 2 years, it's a 1 week notice, and 2 weeks for workers who have been with your organization for longer. But during COVID, those are unforeseeable circumstances. So we do now need to be abide by the notice requirement as stated as the employment standards. However, let's give as much notice as possible to make sure that workers make arrangements. So that's for layoff. And now let's talk about recalling. Sorry, one more thing before we go to recalling. The employment standards has also changed in the way that in the past in our province, if the workers are laid off for 60 consecutive days in the 120 days period, is considered the temporary layoff becomes permanent, which means termination is in place. However, during COVID, there are a few changes around the layoff period. And right now, so since the summer month, our province has changed employment standards around layoff periods. Now it's 180 consecutive days. So on the 181st days, consecutive days, then termination pay or termination notice would be required. On top of that, if your organization has been paying your workers during layoff periods some sort of wages, pension, contributed to their benefits premiums, and there is an agreement in writing, the dates around 180 days can be extended beyond 180. So that's meaning that during those temporary layoff periods that you have maintained communication, put it in writing, and you have been offering some sort of payments. Now, when it comes to recalling workers back to the workforce, it has to be in writing again. In the HR language, if it is not written down, then the conversation did not happen. Documentation, documentation, and documentation. Put your recall notice in writing and give the workers a 7 days notice period. And again, if the worker has a few kids or elder care or other situations they need to take care of in their family, give as much notice as possible so they can make those arrangements. So that's my quick refresher on employment standards. Let's talk about how to re-onboard and reintegrate your workers. So first of all, follow employment standards. And when you have the workers recalled into the workplace, conduct an organizational-wide orientation. So by that, I mean refresh your workers' memory of policies, procedures, your culture, how fun it is to work with you, performance expectations, attendance, dress code, communications, etc., etc. Give people the time and space to get themselves back to work, both mentally and physically. Book one-on-ones. I don't know if that's part of your habit or part of your typical work schedules, but I would suggest for managers to put in their calendar to allow one-on-one conversations with the workers in a private setting on a regular basis. It could be bi-weekly, it could be monthly, but during COVID, I would suggest more often than you would typically do. This is also a great time to check in with your workers. Besides setting your performance communications expectations in place, this is also a great opportunity for you to talk to your workers about how they're doing. We're all human beings. I don't know about you, but for me, I had always been working from home. I was so used to it. But despite that, even during COVID, I really missed that human interactions. So I actually wouldn't mind going back to an office or to an office environment, physical environment, so I can socialize, integrate, and mingle with others, but knowing there are safety protocols in place. So as a manager, this is a great opportunity for you to rebuild that human touch, that interaction relationship with your workers, and ask, hey, how are you doing? How can I help you? Pay attention to signs of inconsistency in their attitudes, behaviors, attendance, or work performances. Maybe they're signs of mental stress or inconsistent mental stress, or just inability to get work done. Support your workers, give them the tools and resources, provide a training, and have regular dialogues. If people are really stressed, maybe accommodation is requested, then this is a good time to make documentation of those conversations. Build up infrastructure with your organization, point people to the right resources. And again, if you have benefits offered through your organization, that's a great resource to point people towards. EFAP, Employee Family Assistance Program, as I mentioned, very inexpensive to set up, but a great resource for employees to get short-term solution-based confidential counseling. And then also there are a few websites like the Canadian Mental Health Association has some really good resources on their websites. Bell Let's Talk also has some really good resources on their website as well when it comes to mental health and how to deal with mental health issues in your workplace. If your company does have an EFAP program, Employee Family Assistance Program, also talk to your EFAP provider. Some of the organizations that I have consulted with, their EFAP provider is providing a lot more than just a telephone call or virtual counseling. They can also implement, or they can also come into the workplace, I guess these days we virtually, to give training to managers and supervisors about dealing with mental health stress in the workplace. As a manager, it's our duty to make sure that we are providing a healthy and safe work environment to our workers and invite your staff for conversations. If your staff are comfortable, this is a perfect time when they come back to the site and call you out if you're not following the COVID safety protocols. And this is also a time for them to brainstorm about creative ways to serve customers. And so for example, one of the nonprofit organizations that I consult with, I had suggested for them in the summer months to meet with clients in a parking lot. So instead of being in a confined space in the office that people may be a little worried to go into, keep the proper distance, but in the open space, in the parking lot, or even a park nearby. Have a contingency plan if your workers cannot come back to work or refuse to come back to work. And those are your critical workers. What do? Who is going to cover up the work? All right, so this is a good time for us to do a quick breakout room activity. So Mike is going to assign you to a few breakout rooms, and you are going to have 10 minutes within your group to talk about accommodations. What type of accommodations have your employees requested from you, and how has your organization addressed them? If you have not experienced anything like this, then discuss the type of accommodations that you foresee your workers may request from you. So Mike, can I pass it back to you? So for the interest of time, let's move on to the next item on the agenda list is to talk about accommodation requests. So in the breakout room, I have heard a few of you talk about that workers refuse to come back to work or needing special accommodations due to their family circumstances. And even one of you even commented that it's hard to bring workers back to work because and some of the interviews that you've scheduled that people don't even want to come to interviews could be because of healthcare concerns. It could also be because they're collecting EI and CRB benefits. So we'll talk about that today. So a common question that I have heard from employers these days is about accommodations. Recognize this as an employer, as a manager, it's really important for us to know this is an unprecedented time. It's hard for us as a manager and business owner. It's also very hard for the employees. So first of all, we need to identify the needs for accommodation. Just because employee ask you they want to work from home, or just because employees ask you they want to have reduced hours, does their situation actually trigger a duty to accommodate? And every situation should be handled in confidence, individually, not setting a precedence for your future arrangements with other workers, and in consultation with the employees. As an employer, we do have the duty to accommodate. And I'm just going to mention the definition here. The duty to accommodate, it means that we're making changes to the policies, the rules, the culture, the infrastructure, standards, and also just to make sure we don't have a negative impact on the workers who work with us because of their mental or physical disabilities or challenges or other protected grounds protected under the Alberta human rights legislation. So for example, common workplace accommodations would be move a desk closer to a washroom or closer to an elevator, building up a wheelchair ramp to your second floor. That may only work for a larger organization because for a small organization, you may not have the capital to do that. And also providing sign languages interpreters for meetings for people with listening, hearing problems. And also ergonomical desks that are often requested during COVID as workers work more remotely, work from home. They may not have the proper arrangements. Or attending pregnant women, attending doctor's appointments, so allow that flexibility for them to attend those appointments. One interesting accommodation I've worked on in the recent years was this lady that I worked with, she is afraid of heights. And the building that we are asking her to have meetings with us is on the 20th floor. So in order for us to address her fear of heights, we would always meet her on the first floor. So that's an easy accommodation. So that's just an example. Each accommodation is going to be different based on workers' unique circumstance. The employer has a duty to accommodate, but not every request triggers a duty to accommodate. It needs to be confidential. And another thing I want to mention is that workers, they have this ideal situation in their mind. If I ask my manager, I want to be accommodated, I want to be accommodated right now and to my perfect ideal mind. That's not going to happen. Reasonable accommodation does not equal to perfect or preferred accommodation. It's a reasonable accommodation for the employee and employer that business still continues and having a less negative impact on the worker. So this is a good time to do a poll share. So poll question. So I hope you participate with me. I'm going to pull up the poll question on the screen, and then I'm going to give you 15 seconds for you to participate. So this is a multiple choice question. Have you stayed in touch with your employees when they were temporarily laid off? All right, thank you very much. So now I'm going to share the results. And so you can see on the screen that have you keep in touch with your workers while they were temporarily laid off. 44% of you answered yes, you have kept in touch regularly. 33% of you said once to a few times formally, and one of you says once to a few times casually, and one organization has not kept in touch with the employees while they were laid off. I'm going to share again my screen. So the next thing on the list is I'm going to invite you to put into the chat box about how have you kept in touch with your workers when they were temporarily laid off. So you can simply put by email, social media, company bulletin boards, newsletter, whatever that case may be. So I invite you to do that in the next 15 seconds. Some of you said Skype and text, phone calls, informal ways actually work really well. Email, video messages, wow, that's fancy. Staff groups chat, that works really well. Telephone calls, emails, and text messages. Perfect. Thank you very much for your participation. The reason I asked that question is because when you have kept in touch with your workers, it's actually a lot easier to for them to come back to work. They feel they're attached to your workforce and they're more willing to come back to work, and they're less likely to listen to rumors or misleading information about your workplace. If you have not kept much in touch with your workers going forward, and if your workers were still laid off or you're laying off more people, consider posting on social media to draw people's attention, just giving them regular updates about where the business is at. Bulletin boards or newsletters, those also work really well. If you work in a very small community and the workers are more inclined to use written communication or in-person communication, you can have signages outside of, close to your building. So when workers drive past by in the communities, then they see it. The next thing that I want to address is about employees who refuse to come back to work. And through the breakout room chats and also in seeing your answers in the chat box, there are few employers who have concerns around this area. So why do some employees refuse to come back to work? I am going to launch another poll and for you to tell the audience why you think your workers are having concerns coming back to work. So please take 15 seconds to vote. Perfect, thank you very much. And I'm going to share the results with you. So on the screen, you should see the majority of you, 63% of you participated, saying that the workers refuse to come back to work because they're collecting better benefits while staying on EI or CRB instead of coming back to the workplace. And then other reasons that's very popular is because they're concerned about their own health and safety or the family's health and safety, or they just cannot having a proper arrangement around childcare or family supports. And this is very common. These concerns are very common. So if you're experiencing this, you're definitely not in this alone. And I want to address them. So if your workers, majority of you have said that your workers are not coming back to work because they're staying off on EI and CRB. I mean, CRB runs out this Saturday, September 26th is the last day that workers can apply. If they're on regular unemployment insurance for regular benefits, which means they lost work prior to COVID, then they have up to 1 year, depends on their circumstances, to stay on EI. So there is a period of time that the government benefits is coming to an end, that workers have no choice but to come back to work. The other thing that I've seen some employers use to address is one of the restaurants that I often go to, the owners is experiencing exactly the same issue. So in July and August, when the restaurant was super busy, the owner had given $2 extra per hour for workers, plus the tips and gratuities for them to come back to work. So workers were concerned about their health and then the safety, but on top of that, they were collecting CERB at home, right? So it was a lot easier money for them to get. So in this situation, the owner had implemented additional income for the workers to have a bigger incentive to come back to work. That may work for you or may not work for your situation. Each organization is going to be different. As your employees who just refuse to come back to work and they want to stay on EI or CRB, make a documentation. Because as you're recalling workers back to work, remember we talk about those notifications needs to be in writing. So document that you have sent your workers a 7 days notice saying that 7 days from now, you're coming back to work. And these are the consequences if you don't, which means that if you have properly recalled your workers coming back to work and workers refused, after a few attempts, it could be considered abandonment of their job or trigger disciplinary actions. And we don't want to do that, especially during COVID, right? Everybody is really stressed out. We want to make sure we're supporting workers. So this may be a good time if your workers are having difficulty coming back to work for you to have that conversation with them to truly understand what can we do to bring you back to work. And if their concerns are health and safety, so as an employer, we do have a duty to make sure our workplace is safe and clean and for them to come back to work. Have you done the proper sanitization using professional cleaning companies, perhaps? Arranging personal protective equipment such as gloves, masks, hand sanitizers, and the plastic glass and proper distance, for example. Perhaps a staggered entry, staggered shift hours, so you reduce the number of people in one location. It could also be that you let workers do a hybrid of working remotely and coming back to office, so you don't have all the workers in the office at the same time. You could also invite a occupational health and safety officer to come to your workplace and inspect on your measurements and protocols. Once you have done everything and the workers still don't want to come back to work for no clear reasons, you have done everything. So the onus then is on the workers to prove they have good reason not coming back to work. And also childcare and family support arrangements. I understand September, schools are reopening, kids are being sent back to school. It's still a messy time for parents to figure out what's the best way dealing with home educating or sending kids back to school. What if they are requested to be self-isolating because one of the kids contracted the virus and blah, blah, blah. This is a really interesting time. So as an employer, it's important for us to keep that regular communication and keep an open mind. because when it comes to work and family, guess what? Family comes first. But just because your workers have elder cares or child care issues, it does not mean they cannot work at all. I mean, prior to COVID, they still have their elder care, they still have their child care issues, right? Arrangements they needed to make. So the onus is also on the workers to make sure they have exhausted all the venues to support their child care and family care, and then come back to you say, there's absolutely no way I can come back to work because of these reasons. If they have not explored any venues, then the onus is on them. Maintain regular communications, and documentation is really key. So this is a good time for us to pull in the case study for the next 15 minutes or so. So Mike is going to put you back into the breakout room and you're going to do the case study. The case study is in the link that I sent you through the chat box at the beginning of the webinar. So you can click into the link and see the case study. Mike, can you assign us again?
Okay, I think almost all of us are back in the main room. It will mute you automatically, I believe, coming back in. So just a reminder. And then we will have Ada wrap it up. We're a little over time, so case study was good. We'll be curious from room 2. We'll be curious to know what you guys came up with in room 1.
Okay, all right, that's good to know. So I'm just going to quickly address our discussion in room number 1. So this is a case that I made up based on a few nonprofit organizations here in Northern Alberta. And so what I had suggested, whenever there are funding issues, and this applies to nonprofit, also applies to for-profit, is to first look internally. Where are we bleeding money? Are we doing a good job tracking and managing our budget? Is there any patterns of budgeting issues or money that we shouldn't have overspent? The second thing was, for a lot of small organizations and nonprofits, they were taking this time to downsizing their office space. Workers, half of them are working from home. For staggered entry into the office, they don't need as much a space. The clients they serve, they had launched a hotline, hot Facebook page, virtual counseling. So a lot of the clients can seek advice through non-in-person meetings. So that reduces the need for space again. So the organization, nonprofits that I've talked to are really taking this opportunity to seek co-work space, which means that you share the common areas, conference rooms, washrooms, cafeteria, and meeting space and technology, but you rent the office space on a shorter term lease basis. A lot more flexibility, a lot less cost, and also give opportunity for different organizations to brainstorm and partner and collaborate. One of the participants in my breakout room had mentioned the government nowadays really encourages collaborations between different organizations, and that'll be one way of doing that. So that's quickly to wrap up our discussion in the breakout room number 1. Just to wind down our webinar, I want to remind you of a really great government job grant that you can consider. For any employer, you could consider offer employees training and taking advantage of this grant opportunity. Either bring your workforce upscaled skills or bring everybody on the same page in terms of technology usage. Why not take advantage of up to $10,000 per trainee, per employee, per fiscal year funded by the government? So there is a link, or if you want to just Google, you can find it very easily. So that concludes the webinar for today. And I know we're a little over time, but I'm happy to stay here if you have any questions or comments. Mike.
I've just launched the poll, my poll. It's very short, but if you guys wouldn't mind just running through and quickly doing that, I'll let the webinar or the workshop run itself out here while I leave that polling open. Thanks, Sally. Thanks for coming. Thanks everybody for coming. Remember, this is the first of 8, so tell your friends. We'll have this posted and I'll email each of you where it's posted so you can watch it back or invite others to watch it. Ada, I'd like to thank you for today. I got a lot out of this. Especially those points you just covered after the breakout group. Alberta Labor and Immigration for helping fund this and make this possible. And then next up on the calendar is October 22nd. That is a Thursday, noon to 1:30 again. And that is about managing a remote workforce, which I think is clearly going to be a big one, given what we've talked about today. And that's it. I'm just going to let the polling run out and thank everybody for coming. Thank you, Ada.
Yeah, thanks. I'm going to stay on the line for a little bit in case any participant have individual questions.